Hello.
Ms. Van Noy, do we have Natalie? We do. Okay, thank you. So we are already in session. We will start with the pledge.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
So the first item on our agenda tonight is our Spirit of Excellence segment. So I'm going to pull that up quickly. So this is a time where we recognize the outstanding students and staff who are truly making an impact. Tonight, we wish to recognize a staff member. SLPS social worker Tamika Slaughter was recently featured on Channel 4 for the outstanding job she does assisting her families at Nottingham and Ames. Not only does she provide social emotional support, Ms. Slaughter also goes out of her way to make sure students have clothing, food, and other necessities. The KMOV story focused on Ms. Slaughter's quick efforts to help an SLPS family get their heat turned back on through the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program. KMOV learned of Ms. Slaughter's work from Ameren, Missouri. Nottingham Principal Kimberly Long said of Ms. Slaughter, "She's dedicated to our student body, and we are lucky to have her as a part of our family. Thank you to Ms. Slaughter for going above and beyond for her students." Thank you. Ms. Bell, will you take roll call, please?
Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Dr. Roberts? Ms. D. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. Bowell?
Here.
Ms. S. Jones?
Present.
Ms. Rhodey Howell?
Here. So normally we would have public comment. The Board of Education of the City of St. Louis values the opinions of the St. Louis community. We are committed to receiving public comments during the COVID-19 pandemic and the corresponding suspension of in-person public Board of Education meetings. As part of this effort, the board is inviting interested members of the public to submit written comments to the following email address prior to the start of board meetings. And that email address is slpsinfo@slps.org. Subject to the requirements that commenters exercise proper decorum and respect for individual students or employee privacy, the Board of Education will assemble the written comments and make them available for review by the public via a link that will be placed on the district website alongside the link for viewing rebroadcasts of the board meeting. This procedure for submitting public comments will remain in effect until the Board of Education returns to normal in-person public meeting format. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Adams for the superintendent report.
Good evening. At the October board meeting, I was pleased to share that 2 seniors at Metro High School received perfect scores on the ACT. I also promised to share if any other students joined that exclusive group. Tonight, I have good news. Zad Ahajere of the CSMB Medical and Bioscience has also earned a perfect score of 36. We want to say congratulations to him, his teachers, and family on this great achievement. We look forward to seeing what his next steps are following graduation. I also want to thank one of our community partners, KidSmart, which has supported the district for over the years and recently held an exclusive school supply drive through events for St. Louis Public Schools teachers. Each teacher who signed up received approximately $800 worth of supplies. We appreciate their generosity. Finally, a quick reminder, the district will be closed on tomorrow, Wednesday, November the 11th, in observation of Veterans Day. At this point in time, I have a presentation to provide to the board. The board received a document from me earlier this week that is a continuation of our effort to look at school consolidation. Thank you. And so while you do not have this presentation in your packet, it's simply the same white paper that you received that I'm highlighting. So everything in here you already have seen already. I'm simply giving a summary to the public as it relates to this. And so I'll walk through the document for the board and for the public as well. At our last meeting, we talked about, at least I talked about, and the board received information relative to the criteria that we will be looking at for school consolidation. And so at this point in time, what I would like to present to the board is the criteria and some adjacent or additional information that we're looking at if we move forward in terms of the consolidation. And obviously take some feedback from the board such that we can have a conversation and we could decide if this is the best step to move forward in. As you can see, the categories that we looked at for consolidation are listed here. Those criteria are listed for consolidation. The first one would be, and I apologize, I don't have my glasses with me, enrollment, demand, which will be worth 25 points. And the 5 categories that are listed here will be the total student population for their school boundary area, the percentage of SLPS students in school boundary areas who choose the school, the percentage of SLPS enrolled who live in the school boundary area who did not choose the school, and number D, percent enrolled who live outside of the school boundary area and who chose that particular school. And last, a review of the 5 years of student enrollment. The second indicator would be building conditions. The year the building was built, which obviously has some impact on how old the building is and the condition it might be in, and the fact that the ongoing maintenance costs will be higher in older buildings. The gross square footage, meaning how large the building is, the building condition, and there are 5 areas or 4 areas that we looked at: excellent, good, fair, and poor. The grade level that would be for that particular school, a project description of the concerns, an estimate cost to address the project description, and the building systems that would be impacted, whether that would be HVAC, roofing, all of those kinds of things. The next item would be the item of capacity or utilization. The school evaluation based on a building or a building utilization compared to the total building capacity, how many students are enrolled compared to how many schools was built to hold the school, The percentage of utilization will vary based upon the school grade configuration. At the level will be 65%, and senior high school will be 65% as well. The last item, the fourth item, and that will be worth 25 points. The next item will be impact to the neighborhood. Some of the things that we will be looking at is the data or specific support from the City of St. Louis Office of Development, and we met with them last week. And just to be clear, this has been an ongoing conversation with them over the last 2 to 3 years. We're looking at data. I'll talk about a chart in a second that you have in front of you. Data or specific support from developers or specific support from elected officials will also be evaluated. The population changes from the last 10 years. We're looking at data from 2000 to 2010. We don't have current census data, but we do have some data from the City Development Office up until 2017-18 that we're looking at, and the impact of the school closure to the overall neighborhood. Would keeping the school open make a difference in terms of that particular neighborhood? And obviously that will be a subjective piece based on the other data that we're looking at. And lastly, special programs, unique special programs approved by the Board of Education of the City of St. Louis and supported by special equipment or grants. Innovative programs designed to develop and test new instructional models. And lastly, special programs designed to support our most vulnerable student population. So the categories would be enrollment and demand, which will be worth 25 points. Building condition, 20 points. Capacity, 25 points. Impact of to the neighborhood, 15 points, and special programs, 15 points as well. So this is the matrix that I'll be asking the board to consider tonight. And obviously, based upon the matrix, I'll be bringing back names of schools to you. So it is incredibly important that if you have any questions or concerns, now is the time for us to have a conversation, a robust conversation around these factors, because these factors will bring back to you, hopefully at the next board meeting, unless the board delays and pushes the date out further, the names of schools that will be impacted. We have not looked at schools specifically because the criteria has not been approved by the board.
All right, thank you for putting this, or to you and your team for putting this together, Dr. Adams. I did have one question and one thing that I noticed, and I just want, I guess, the board to be aware of. So even though enrollment demand is 25 points and capacity is 25 points, we're really looking at enrollment as 50 points, which is really half of this whole pie, because I think there's a high correlation between enrollment and capacity or building utilization. So I think we'd be hard pressed to find a building that has high or low enrollment, but high building utilization. So I just wonder about a little bit about the weighting of that, unless we want to just make it 50. I understand the differentiation that we have there, but just understanding that since there is such a high correlation, it's almost one category, which is half of the 100 points.
I think that's a great question. Let's look at the 5 categories that are at the top, Mr. Lang. What you will see is there will be some schools that have high demand, meaning that kids are coming from outside of the neighborhood to go to that particular school. And to your point, the building utilization might be low, but the demand might be high based upon families who are interested in that particular school. And so while you are correct, there will be some correlation. I don't want to say that in every single case, the correlation will be a close correlation. We have not run this data on schools yet. I've intentionally not gotten before my team to do so. When I met with them today, based upon the board taking a vote tonight, we will do that on Thursday. Thursday, 3 hours, we will spend time going through each one of our schools, looking at this particular criteria, if the board is amenable to the criteria that we're bringing before them. So in some cases, and we're actually going to walk through one school, Mr. Lang, in your packet, we're going to walk through one example to give you some idea of what that might look like. Because I thought it might be good for the board to go through the exercise. While I think the board trusts administration to do it fairly, I think giving the board some sense of how we are arriving at a score will be important. If the board sees fit at this meeting to change 25 to some other number, then that is appropriate at this point in time. That's why we're asking the board to weigh in on this. We have looked at it, we've weighed it, we've discussed it ad nauseum, quite frankly. But if the board is going to make decisions based upon this criteria, I think the board needs to feel comfortable that this is the appropriate criteria for the board, because it is my hope and belief that once the board weighs in on the criteria, when I bring names back to the board will say yes, because the board has already set the stage for the criteria. So your point is well taken. There will be some correlation, but in every single case, it won't be, Mr. Lang, because as we look at families who are choosing to go to that school, that might indicate a higher demand. Some of the schools that are on our list, quite frankly, are magnet schools as well. Some of our small magnet schools are on that list as well. And you'll see that the demand is really high for those kinds of schools, although the capacity might not be highly utilized. The building may not be highly utilized.
Gotcha. And so understood. So then counterpoint to that, if we have 25 points for enrollment and demand are very different things. Are there subweights then for that 25? So of that 25 points, how much value does demand have versus enrollment within that total 25-point category? Would be my question.
I would say, and my team had this conversation that we're having right now. I tried not to be so specific in each one of these categories. Like example, enrollment out of the 25, we could have put a number. If it was a declining enrollment over a 5-year period of time, we could have said it was worth 5 points. It was worth 10 points. It was worth 15 points. I think part of the challenge, Mr. Lang and board, is that we have to be somewhat subjective. These are the big categories that we're looking at, but we have to be somewhat subjective with some of these categories. I didn't want to have a number for each one. When Mrs. Banks and my team looked at this today, they pushed me to do the same kinds of thing that you are articulating here, to try to be very specific about a certain one of these A, B, C, D, E. And I think some subjectivity, as we discussed this, has to be put in place. In other words, I don't think we can do it that particular way by putting a 10 or a 5 or a 7 on a particular one of these 5 indicators here.
Thank you.
I have a question or maybe comment. And I do agree with Mr. Lane about the weight of those two things. I think what we're going to discover is that those two things are going to be almost equal and put a higher weight. But I would really, since we started with a much longer list and a different list, and we narrowed it down to these 5 important areas to evaluate the schools, I would almost like to see the weight of everything to be equal, because I think it tells the community that the impact that these closings have on their neighborhood and our attempt to consider other special programs is very important as well. The only way I would see us not making them equal is if demand included, the demand by the community to use the building for something else. If demand doesn't include that, I almost would like to see the weightings just be 20 down the board, 20% down the board, because I think we are going to definitely get an unequal balance, an imbalance with enrollment and demand and capacity and utilization. And so that's my recommendation, that we have equal rate weightings.
So obviously the board has given me guidance in terms of what they want to look at. We looked at it differently, but obviously if the board is going to use this as the determining factor in terms of what schools might be impacted, what schools would not be impacted, I'll take your feedback as it relates to that. For the record, we did have 5 initially with academic achievement, and I can't think of what the other one is right now. Academic achievement being one of the 5, and so we took out academic achievement. Although you'll see in the second that we are still in a previous document we put together is there, but we're not using it in any way, shape, or form.
But those initial ones where there was some debate over them, so
yes, we took them off.
Ended
yes,
up being the most important.
Yes, ma'am.
And just being new to the board, but hearing the conversation, I sense that all of these things are very important. So, so I just think the equal weight may be a better approach.
This is Natalie. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm looking at 4D, the impact on the neighborhood, I know that it's really subjective and it's hard to kind of gauge. But what I'm wondering is if we have any sort of rubric for what factors are being taken into account and who is taking those factors into account. What we think the impact on a neighborhood might be completely different than what that neighborhood feels it's going to be. So if, I mean, I know we've done our community visioning sessions and we've gotten community input, but I don't think that we got down to that specific, how does this impact me level of, I guess, of feedback from the neighborhood, because they weren't sure what our rubric was going to be when we were establishing these factors. So I'm not sure if we've thought about that, but it's just something that I'd like to keep in mind. Do you have any feedback for me on that or insight?
I think you're correct. I think we could make that determination almost on all of the factors, quite frankly, Ms. Val. We have to start at some point in time. It is my intent, once schools are named, to go back and try to have some conversations with the community to get additional feedback if the timeline allows that to occur, plus the elected leaders, and that's why we put that there as a way to try to get some feedback from them. But I think your comments are well spoken in terms of actually asking the community and getting their feedback. But at this point in time, we have not identified a particular school, so we've not had any conversation with them relative to what they think about the school. Frankly and honestly, over the last 3 years, I have had conversations with most older persons who might be impacted, schools that might have been on lists before. So we have had some conversation in that sense, but have we had a specific community forum to that particular group? No. And I do have a list, quite frankly, of almost all neighborhood associations that are active in the city of St. Louis. Some are more active than others, but we do have that kind of list if we wanted to go that deep into a robust conversation. Many of them don't, quite frankly, have children in the school. They're impacted as a result of the property tax and those kinds of things. So I think some of this has to be considered depending upon what needs to happen. But at the end of the day, it's the board that makes a decision. Well, I think listening to them is critically and important. It's the board that has to weigh it and make the final decision, similar to what was said last week when, as it relates to city development.
Thank you. Just one follow-up would be that I do feel like it does need to be taken into account how many neighborhood schools are going to be left in proximity of that neighborhood. You know, I feel like it feels like we're abandoning a neighborhood if we take all of our schools out of there, for example. So I think that's something that I personally would take into account when looking at this data. But I think that your points are well made, and I appreciate the background on that. And I think it's a great idea to, once we have some things narrowed down, to actually consult with the community. And I mean, as far as these neighborhoods, including my own, that don't have active neighborhood associations, I think maybe we could do some creative outreach there in kind of forming some sort of forum for people to give their feedback, even if we can't speak through those formalized entities. So thank you, and thank you for considering all that.
Yes, ma'am. And we'll walk through a document in a second that I think might address, Ms. Val, some of your concern about how the neighborhood is impacted. You don't have the document I'm about to go over with the board, but I will gladly walk you through it in a conference call so you could see some of the nuances of it. So since we have a little pause here, what I like to do is to ask you to pick up the document that looks like this. It says elementary school, and it looks like an Excel document. It's an Excel document that looks like this.
Can I ask you one more question before
Sure.
we go into?
Yes, ma'am.
Or maybe we'll see it in here. Let me look at the
Okay,
example first.
so I want to walk through this document to kind of address Ms. Val's question as well as a little bit of Mr. Lang's question.
Dr. Adams, before you begin,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm having trouble hearing not only Ms. Val, but my other colleagues at the table. So it may be helpful for you to repeat what you're hearing, because I'm having difficulty hearing.
Yes, ma'am, I'll do that. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so this is an elementary school that's in a district. It does not, I have not named the school intentionally, but I want to walk through the data points that we will be looking at, and obviously look at any additional ones if you want to. Number one is enrollment. Dr. Adams, why is there a blue number for 1920 and a black number? Well, the blue number is only K through 6. The black number includes pre-K. That's an important distinction. All of the other numbers include everything. But I'm only looking at data for 1 year, and it's not this current year, because we know that the impact of this current year we know that schools in the districts and cities and states are impacted by COVID-19. So I looked at last year's data, 1920. So this represents 1920 data. If you look at the number of kids in the boundary, kids that go to Lewis Public Schools, kindergarten through 6, there are 295 kids who live in this boundary and could go to this particular school. 295. That represents 495. The actual kids who are in the boundary who go to that school is 119. That represents 88% of the population, 135. There's 16 kids that don't live in the boundary that go to that particular school. So when I talk about demand, Mr. Lang, if this number was 150, it would show that there's a demand from families outside of this particular boundary to go to that particular school. The next number, while we are not looking at the academic achievement, I thought I would put it here because it was a number we looked at in the past. You could see that the academic achievement APR points, 70 would be the total number of points that a school could get. There's no data for 1920 because the state did not do any testing last year. But you can see what the APR numbers are. You see a fixed number of 7.5 and a percentage. So 7.5 is 10.7% of 70. And you can walk through all of those three numbers. The next one, because this is an elementary school, there is no graduation rate. Because it's an elementary school. Kids don't graduate from elementary school. They move on to the next grade level, but they're not graduated. Attendance, you see 90-90 attendance. The state looks at two types of attendance. 90% of the kids in the school, 90% of the time, 90% over 90% of the time. 92 is the ADA, which is the average daily attendance. And you can see what those numbers are all the way across, 76.2, 90-90, 90% average daily attendance, 76.2, 92.5 average daily attendance for 17-18, and you go follow the trajectory there. In terms of students who were suspended, you can see what the numbers there where it says discipline. These are students who were suspended out of the school, are recommended for suspension. The FCAP is simply the facility, a comprehensive assessment of the school. 1957 is when the school was built. The FCAP score is fair. The square footage is 86,866. The cost to put the school from fair to good will be $2.6 million. The building utilization is about 55.4%. Prop S dollars, the board, the public approved a proposition bond to improve schools. $665,000 was spent at that time in this particular school. The budget analysis is that $1.577 million is spent on this particular school. Food service means that 98% of the kids eat the lunch on a regular basis. There are 2 buses that support this school. Development, we found that there are 26 units which involve 1 rehab and 20 units in this particular neighborhood that's being developed. Closed schools, there are no closed schools in this area, in this zip code at this point in time. The per student cost is $19,000 per student. Neighborhood development, I left blank because that would be the one there, and special programs, there are no special programs in this particular school. If you look at the map you see in front of you as well, and the map that's in front of everyone, and I did it so Ms. Vowles could kind of get some idea, you can see the legend that shows where SLPS schools are, where the resident building permits are, anything over $25,000. You can see permits, and this was in 2019, in green. Commercial ones would be in the color look like a purple, but you can see that the central concentration of where development is taking place is in the central quarter, not in north and not a lot in south. And these were building permits to let you know that people are building are doing renovations over $25,000 of property in this area. If I named the name of the school, you would see that there's not much development in that area, but the name of the school is not here. We will be using that as we look at it because the name of the schools will be there, so we'll know what the development is in that area. We have conversations with the LRA at a development office as late as last week, and so we have a scope of other development that's taking place, but quite frankly, all of it resides in the central quarter that we're talking about here. Very little outside of that area, commercial as well as residential.
So it does lead me to the question. I like this example, but when you're assigning points, are you going to be assigning all points based on the information, or you're going to assign some range of points based on the information?
Some range of points.
Some range of points.
Yes, ma'am. So up to 25 will be the number. There are a number of factors to look at. We have not talked to aldermen as well to see what their intent is in that area. Some of them I have spoken to, some I have not. But the intent once we come up with some numbers is to sit down with aldermen as well, because there may be some things that are going on that that I don't know about, that I would doubt that the city doesn't know, because persons have to get building permits. But they have some ideas that we want to kind of value.
I think what would be helpful, at least for me, I know in looking at a number of these, which we will over some time, we'll get to understand more, but line 13 with the FCAT score. So I know you said this one is fair and you talked about moving from fair to good, but if there's like a legend on the side that lets us know what the scale is, what the full scale is, so we know what we're comparing it to. On line 24, the per student cost, if we could, if there could be, again, with that legend or whatever, maybe next to it, that has an average per student cost for all of our elementary schools, so that we know, we don't just see that number, but we know what we're comparing that to, as opposed to just other schools that are presented. So the district average for that elementary or high school or whatever it may be. And then my last, I think the last one, 15, line 15 and 18. What's the difference between those two dollar amounts?
Line 15 is the cost that we estimate to put into the building to get it from a fair to a good.
That's okay, so that goes with the FCAT?
Yes, sir. And the budget analysis is how much money is dedicated to that school for staff, for maintenance, for everything else. So for this building, we are putting $1.577 million annually in this particular building for salaries, benefits, utilities, all of that wrapped in together.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'm trying to ask then with this number on line 18.
Yes, sir.
It wouldn't be a direct number of like dollars saved annually necessarily,
that's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Is there a way to get some number like that for each school? I know it's kind of tricky because you have to factor in the sale of the school and everything. But.
Well, Mr. Lang, in the 12 years I've been here, that's been the most asked question and the hardest one to answer, because I can tell you that we save on administrative costs and clerical costs, but most of the staff is going to go to other buildings that are vacant. And our utility cost goes down, transportation costs may be absorbed because kids may be being transported to a larger space. So there's some nuances around this. I could give you some estimate school by school, but that number is not really tight. I could give you some estimate, but it's very difficult to determine that. We anticipate, and I'm talking off the top of my head, so I better not say anything else because I don't even want to say it because it'll get in the airways and I'll be held responsible for it. So I'll wait until, if the board comes back with some recommendations based on those, then I can give you possibly a better number. At this point in time, it's kind of difficult, but I think you can figure out an administrator and a clerical as the two persons that definitely leave the building. Counselors, social workers, if they have a 0.5, that 0.5 is moved somewhere else. And so that's why it's difficult to determine.
Gotcha. And then the last thing that I have is, again, what would help for this sheet, knowing that this school isn't named, but just a distance to the next school would be great. So how far away in terms of radius, the next school would be.
So I want to
didn't
repeat,
hear this.
I want to repeat so I'm clear. Number one, a legend that would show an average for number 24.
Correct.
Then distance to another school is number 3, I think. Or really 3 was the amount saved. Number 4 was distance. And what was number 1 again, Mr. Lang?
The FCAT scale.
FCAT scale?
Right, the
Gotcha,
scale for FCAT.
gotcha, gotcha.
Or you can just tell us now it's fair, good,
It's excellent, or good, fair, and poor.
That works.
And at this point in time, if my memory is correct, we don't have any schools that are listed as excellent. From an FCAT report data, all of them need some kind of work to get them to the next phase.
Dr. Adams, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
As it relates to item number 15 under cost, I understand you said that this is a breakdown of what is needed. So will you be providing a list that kind of shows like the high priorities for this school versus what will be a low priority and what exactly would be needed to fix this school up?
Yes, ma'am. The FCAT report that the board received in October, that information is in there school by school. Yes, ma'am. I also want to call your attention to 2 other documents. I know we did some work with the board in October, and so there were some questions that were asked, and I know Mrs. Fowler wasn't here at that time, but we kind of had a work session and looked at some documents. So those 2 documents are on your table where it says board questions, responses, and also some priorities that the board looked at, and you kind of gave a ranking of priorities, and that goes to the equity sheet that's in the document as well. So I thought I would bring that back just so you could see as well.
Can you, is number 24 per student cost, is that embedded in 18, the budget analysis line?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay.
Dr. Adams, my question is about homeowners, home ownership in each area where our, excuse me, where our schools are located. I'm noticing a trend toward, you have 26 units here listed toward rental property, but I'd like to know how many homeowners live around which particular school we might be discussing. Is that possible?
We'll reach out to the city and see if we could get that information. Yes, ma'am, we'll look to see what we can do. Even when we had some conversations with the city on last week, and this is not the first time this issue has come up, the 26 units might be 1 bedroom, which means that there are no children likely, or it might be condos. And so to say that there's development, we have to dig a little bit deeper to see if that development is a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. That's some of the challenges of digging into some of the information. While there may be new development that's taking place, that new development may not be aligned toward supporting children being in that development. So I can get you the home ownership by more likely by census tract, because we have not a conflict here, but we have the data in the census tract has a different code than the data that's aligned to the zip code. And so we'll see what we can get in terms of that, but I suspect that we'll be able to get it for you.
Okay, yes, because I noticed that even when I used to work for the Lead Coalition, I would go around to various homes. There were a lot of homes that might have 2 bedrooms and might have 12 people living there. People in the basement, people in the attic, that kind of thing. So, and many of them don't report to the census. When I worked for the census, a lot of people were not reporting who lives in the home. So
Yes.
if we could see which homeowners are in the neighborhood would be really great.
We'll work to get that information for you.
Thank you.
I would also ask, when we actually go through this process, if we can make sure we understand what the per student cost is made up of, because I can't calculate it. So I want to be clear on what
The
is included
factors
in
that make up the per student cost, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Are there any questions?
I do. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
I know that we put all the SLPS schools, Dr. Adams, on this map. You guys put this together. Would it make sense to you to put the charter schools that are located on this map as well to see? So if we're considering the school in North St. Louis and like for closure, like to show where the closest charter school will be, because they would more than likely eat that.
So I have that information on the map as well. I didn't bring that tonight because we were talking about SLPS. I have a chart like this and the same kind of chart as well. But yes, we do have that information.
Okay.
Just like you see this one right here, it says City of St. Louis building permits over 25% issued in 2019 and SLPS facilities and charters. So yes, we do. In every single case, we are also looking at charters as well. But I didn't want to confuse the board by having another piece of document. But yes, we do have that information. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Adams.
Hi, this is Natalie. I had one follow-up on Donna's comment about homeownership. If we are getting that data, would it be possible to have the total assessed valuation broken down into those same areas for all of the residential property, and what amount the tax revenue they're generating, including the people who are delinquent in their taxes and can't afford them? It might be relevant to know that's a good indicator of income level and home ownership.
And I will make sure that when we inquire to the city, we are able to try to obtain that information as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any board members that would like to propose changes to the criteria before we vote on the criteria?
I would like to.
Would you make that in the form of a motion, please?
Sure. I make the motion that we adjust the weighting, point value weightings that are presented to us to be changed, that each point value is equal amongst the 5 criteria listed.
Can that be repeated, please? It's hard to hear down here.
Okay. I make a motion that the point value weights given to the 5 criteria listed be changed from what they are currently to be 20% for each area instead of what's proposed here.
Is there a second to that motion?
Can I ask a question before we go to vote?
So it needs a second before we can go to discussion on that. Okay, Donna, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question about the last page and the last paragraph. It talked about the BRC for school repurposing and community development. Is that a group or a committee?
So Dr. Adams, if you don't mind, so the motion on the floor is about adjusting the criteria.
Yes.
So I'll entertain discussion on that motion and then we'll vote on that and then the criteria as a whole.
All right.
So let's wrap up on the adjusting of the weights and then we'll come back to, I'll come back to you. Are there any questions or comments as it proposes to, as it relates to Regina's motion to adjust the weights to all be 20%?
Yes, I would, I'm opposed. I would advocate for not doing it. I think I understand your sentiment about the importance of all the categories. However, I think it's, if we make them equal, we're definitely taking the equity out of it, especially for the reasons listed before about double counting. And I'll further shore that up with the last category with other special programs. If a school is smaller with lower enrollment, there's a higher chance that funds for special programs have not gone into a particular school. So to make them all equal, we could essentially have 3 categories that are highly correlated, and those scores, those 20-point scores, can be even lower because of their interconnectedness. So, and I know this isn't the motion on the table, but I would probably move 5 of those points for other special programs to impact on neighborhood.
Any further discussion on the motion to make all weights 20? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
No.
Dr. Roberts?
I can't respond, I can't hear, and so I need the things repeated prior to my being able to vote. I said that a little earlier.
So I think the question on the table, if you don't mind, Madam President, since I'm closest to the mic, is that all Mrs. Fowler has made a motion, second by Mrs. Jones, that all the weights would be equal to 20. And so 20, 20, 20, 20, is that 520 to equal 100, as opposed to 25, 20, 25, 15, and 15. That is the motion that's on the table. I mean, that's the vote that's being taken at this point in time.
Can you repeat? Your mic was off.
I'm going to abstain.
Ms. D. Jones? Ms. Vowell?
Abstain.
Ms.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Abstain.
Ms. S. Jones?
No.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
No.
Motion failed.
So is there a motion, Adam, would you like to make a motion to, a different motion to change the weights?
Yep, I would like to make a motion to change the weights, moving 5 points from other special program considerations to impact on neighborhood.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'd like to have the motion, Dr. Adams, repeated. Are we moving 5 from what category?
So I'll repeat it, Dr. Roberts. Mr. Lane's motion is to move 5 points from special programs, reducing that to 10, and moving those 5 points to neighborhood, to the neighborhood area, which will make that 20 points. All other areas will remain the same.
I'll second because I want to ask a question.
Sure, that's great. So open for discussion on this motion.
Yeah, I just trying to find out. I'm not quite sure I understand why the 5 points would move away from other program considerations to impact. Those seem similar to me. Can you maybe help me understand?
Can you speak up, please?
How you consider those different?
Can you speak up, please?
Could you speak
I'm
into the
sorry.
mic, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just trying to understand the difference, how other special program considerations would be different, distinctly different from impact on neighborhoods. I guess my thought was other special programs would be if we could use the building for, community events, community programs, which would have an impact on neighborhood. Or am I thinking something differently, or is that what we had in mind?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think other special programs are like APs, if they have STEM programming or coding at the school. So things that are outside of the normal curriculum that are embedded within the school because of funding or teacher specialization.
Yeah, so Mr. Lang is correct, and I'll repeat it for Dr. Roberts. Special program means that there's some special unique program. Example, Madison School right now is a special program for special needs families. There's only 58 students in that building, but the building capacity is 300. But we need a school like that to support that population. That would be considered a special program.
So I guess I want to have a follow-up question. If we say we're very close in our numbers, but this is weighted very low, but that's a very important program, how do we adjust how do we ensure that we don't take away something for these, from these special needs people, because everything else looks bad? And I guess that's one of the reasons why I was trying to weight them the same, but how do we account for it?
And I think, as I said earlier, I think there will be some subjectivity to what we bring to the board, understanding the details and the nuances of what needs to happen in the district. Obviously, we'll bring everything to the board, but we'll also bring that we are not recommending this school because it is a special program. It serves a special population. We do not want to impact that population for this particular reason legally and other reasons as well. Grant funding, DESI dollars, through title to support certain kinds of things as well. So that's why I think the notion of Mr. Lang using a point for every little thing in the area is so objective that there has to be some subjectivity in this recommendation that we bring back to the board.
So when you are bringing us possible schools, you're going to already have taken these things into consideration and not even bring those to the table then?
We'll have some discussion about them, but yes,
Okay.
that is correct. Yes, ma'am. That is 100% correct.
And
Thank
I
you.
did consider your point, and I was thinking about worst case versus best case scenario. So if a school does have those programs, best case scenario, they can get all the points in that category. But worst case scenario, they get none of them. So if it's lower, they lose fewer points. And if it's better, they get a higher percentage of the ability.
I feel good about it. Thank you.
Ms. Bell, to be clear, we're voting on the motion Adam made to remove 5 points from special program considerations, reducing that to 10, and adding those 5 points to impact on neighborhood, increasing that to 20. Ms. Bell.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Vowell,
Abstain? Abstain?
Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
motion passed.
Are there any other board members who would like to make a motion as it pertains to the weights or the criteria?
So may I make a statement, please, if you don't mind, board?
Sure.
So it is incredibly important that if the board is making a decision that administration needs to move forward with this particular weight based upon what the vote was just now, that when the administration brings schools to the board is saying, yes, we will support the recommendation of administration. If that is not the case, and I am misunderstanding the intent of the board, I would rather know now as opposed to going through the work. We don't mind doing the work, but getting the community engaged and raising a lot of concerns by the community. If the board has no intention at all of moving forward, even after voting tonight on the weights. Am I clear about what I said? I don't want to come across in any kind of way angry or anything. I just want to be clear such that the effort is made to list schools in the next meeting, if the board doesn't delay pushing this back past the 17th, that the board is actually saying in the vote that you just took, or the vote that you might be taking in a minute, if that is not what the vote says, that yes, if the superintendent brings 12 schools that meet the criteria that you established, that the board will be saying yes, that we will look to consolidate based upon the recommendations coming forward. And I just want to be clear such that I am clear so I can lead my team appropriately and also have conversations with the community. I don't want to walk out here on the plank and then find out that the plank has been cut behind me.
I just think that I think that the first three, we kind of understand better exactly how it's going to be evaluated. I think the last two, though, prior to the final presentation where we say, yeah, let's do this, if you could bring to us exactly how you went through to determine how to score numbers 4 and 5, because I think we need to understand that a little better, because you're just not going to get the pushback. We are too,
yes,
if the impact of the community is great.
I'll take as much time as necessary to go through every single indicator, every single building, and obviously to have discussion and dialogue around. I don't have a problem staying all night to have discussion and dialogue. I just want to understand that that's the intent of the board and the vote that the board is going to take or just took.
So I'd like to move that the board accepts the criteria as amended from Adam's motion.
Second.
Further question or discussion on these criteria?
I do have a question, please.
Yes, Donna, go ahead.
I understand the question that Dr. Adams just presented to the board to be that once he brings the 12 schools before our board at the next meeting, that we need to vote at that particular time on those schools.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No.
Right.
My intent is if we stay with the timeline, I know Mrs. Fowler had a concern about moving too fast, and I don't have a problem making some adjustments if that's what the board wants to do. But you will be looking at the names We will spend the next 6 weeks getting feedback from the community. A town hall meeting, I sent you a document regarding that. I have a timeline, but we will take community input over the next month or so to get feedback from the community prior to you taking any kind of vote.
That's exactly what I want to hear.
Yes,
All right,
ma'am.
Thank you.
Dr. Adams,
Yes, ma'am.
what is the plan to disseminate information or meet with the committee people and all the people in the specific areas?
So my short time frame is Thursday, Friday, administration team will take some time, spend about 2 or 3 hours going through every single school that we're looking at. On Monday, to arrange meetings with the alderpersons such that they get the information prior to it being announced on Tuesday, and me meeting with the administrators of those schools on Tuesday. So before it becomes public, the administrators of the school will know and the alderpersons will know. Based on the vote tonight, I will be setting up meetings with them for Monday.
Okay, so you said for them to know, but I mean, would there be a chance for you guys to actually have a conversation
Oh, yes.
on what
Yeah,
can actually?
I'm sorry, when I say no, I mean a discussion around why the recommendation was made, any kind of input that they have around it. It may not change anything, but I want to give them full disclosure of what we're doing. And quite frankly, Ms. Jones, many of them I've already talked to over the last 2 or 3 years around schools that might be targeted.
I know, but some of them may believe that now their school's completely off of the roster of being closed. And so it sounds to me, that if you're having a conversation with them on Monday, you're just telling them what's going to happen instead of allowing for them to actually be educated about the fact that the school is going to be considered for closure. And here are some things that I might need for you to bring back to me in order for us to change our minds about this. I don't see where they will have time to actually respond or talk to their constituents.
So again, as I said before, if the board wants to make some adjustments, I'm open to that. If the board wants to push back anything, I'm open to that as well. But the time frame is tight. We've had an October meeting that we had together with a lot of data. We had the community meetings as well that many aldermen did participate in. True, they did not have names in schools. So I will, in total respect, understand that if you want to give more time for that feedback, I don't have a problem doing it. If that's something the board will want to do.
I want to say that I completely agree with Susan on that. I think, because my understanding was that we were going to get feedback that could maybe, change our, thought process on what's going to be closed. So my understanding was that you would have that conversation and not as just provide information, but to allow them time to really address the impact on their community, because I don't think we really evaluate impact on community if we don't really hear the feedback about the impact on the community.
So if that is the intent, then the board needs to make a recommendation to push back the time frame, because I will need more time, Ms. Jones and board.
If we delay, so the original as presented was going to have criteria to discussion tonight, and then the proposed list of schools on the 17th.
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess what I'm wondering, are you asking that Dr. Adams determine the list of schools and then go to the alder people to talk about possible changes to that list prior to releasing it to us and to the public on the 17th? So do you want the alder people to be engaged in this process before we hear the list of schools?
I think I think it's okay to publicly propose the list, but not finalize the list until we get, some feedback. If the auditor people choose to give us some feedback, it is what you bring to us in 2 weeks or whatever it is. It's simply a proposed list, and so once they hear the list, then we can have those conversations. And if there's some strong feedback that we need to consider, then prior to finalizing the list, we hear and understand what that feedback is.
So in all due respect, I think one of my concerns, board, would be the self-fulfilling prophecy of putting names out there and then not making a decision, and then it further erodes the community support for that particular school if it remains open. So it would be my preference that the list does not get to you until those kind of robust conversations have taken place. that would be my preference. But again, I will lean to the board's vote.
I'm perfectly fine with that way too, just so give them an opportunity to participate in the conversation. And if you think presenting the list publicly will erode the efforts here, then, you know, come up with the list, have the conversations, and then let us make the final decision.
This is Natalie. I just had a concern. We definitely do need to engage the community, but I feel like right now, older people serve as gatekeepers a lot of the time. And I feel like there are other community organizations and just citizens in general. So I'm a little hesitant to share this information with older people and let them decide how those conversations happen. I definitely think they need to be involved as a leadership in their wards, but I'm a little concerned with making them, essentially just giving them more power than the people in their communities, because we serve all students in the city, and older people do not always serve students. They have other priorities that they have to tend to.
So the intent is that the community will be engaged, because we're going to open the process up with some virtual town hall meetings. Obviously, we can't meet in person right now, but we have several strategies set up to hear from the larger group, Mrs. Val. I think Mrs. Jones's specific concern was about the persons who have been elected officials for that particular area. But we will, it's not that we're not listening to people in the community. We will open the door for that to happen, and all the persons can participate in that process as well. But I think what Ms. Jones was asking for was specific conversations with them, since they were the elected officials for those areas.
And to add to that, Dr. Adams, these individuals may have access to resources that we do not know about that could actually help support our decision either way.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I think I'd like to bring us back to the motion, which is about the criteria. So we're getting a little into process about what comes next. And so without knowing if this criteria is approved, I think it's slightly premature. So if we could bring conversation back to criteria, we can certainly talk about process as the evening goes on, but let's focus first on that motion that's on the table. Are there any further comments on the criteria or the weights?
No, but these were all in response to the statement that Dr. Adams made after that was done. So we were done with that, but he made the statement. So this was in response to what he was asking us.
Right. I take no issue with anything that has been done, just asking that we refocus kind of back here on criteria, and then we'll kind of go into this broader discussion next. Are there any further questions or comments on criteria or weights of criteria? Ms. Bell.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones, Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Vowell,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. So I will open it up for a broader conversation. I know, Donna, you asked some questions about the building revitalization. Joyce, I know you have questions. Susan, I think you probably.
No, what I was asking before, it had to do with the criteria.
Okay,
So
great.
that's it.
So I'll start with Donna because she brought that up a long time ago.
And my question was in regards to this last paragraph, repurposing initiative. And so this was in regards to the BRC. And I'm trying to understand, is that a committee or?
Yes, ma'am. In the past, we've had, the board has made recommendations. In this case, it was the SAB, to a committee that will meet on a regular basis, developers, persons from city, all the persons, as we look at closed buildings to find out what are the best ideas to put those buildings back in use. And this is an ongoing committee in Chicago. That committee is still meeting on a regular basis such that they could try to assist the district in finding the best uses for those particular buildings. So the committee has no power other than coming up with ideas and strategies to try to find out what's the best way to utilize the building.
Okay, so I'm not sure who those members are. It would be very interesting, I'm sure, to the board who the members are.
The board will appoint the members.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the board will be doing the appointing of members. We'll make recommendations. The board will make recommendations. The committee is no longer functioning as of 2016 or 17. And so we will be asking this board, it's similar to what we did with the SAB, to give recommendations for persons that you wanted to serve on that committee.
Okay, and so this committee will be dealing with the vacant
Yes,
buildings
ma'am.
and
Yes, ma'am.
that kind of thing.
And buildings and any other buildings that we might be looking to close. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so we had a conversation as well about historical preservation. We talked about Hempstead School
Mhm.
and the inability to get it torn down, even though it's burnt to a
Yes, ma'am.
crisp. And so will this committee be speaking?
Yes, ma'am. The hope and belief that we'll have some politicians, obviously, and some people who serve from that, whatever that, the group, the preservation group, some representatives also from there to try to assist us in making a decision around closing, tearing it down. We tried to tear it down. They have voted not to allow us to do so. So the intent is that there'll be enough pressure put from the committee to try to encourage persons to make the right decisions for buildings. In this case, tearing that particular building down, that's an eyesore that we can't tear down even if we wanted to right now.
All right, thank you.
Joyce?
Are we setting aside the community input that we got from our visioning sessions and going on to include something else in addition to that? Or are we incorporating the feedback that we got through the visioning session?
It would be my intent that the robust conversation that took place with the visioning session, although it was only 695 persons, did not include, once the names of schools were put there, persons have different views once school names are put out. And so this new information will help inform what has already occurred. But that information was generic. The 695 participated under the understanding that we need to do something different with buildings. That's a different conversation, as you already know, Dr. Roberts. When we say a name of a school, then the neighborhood gets engaged in a different kind of way. And so, no, we're not putting it aside. We're just valuing that community's input as opposed to the general. It's much more specific.
So I just want to, before we move off the subject, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the process now. We are going to, you guys are going to come up with the list and then have community discussion and then bring the list.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The intent right now, district administration team come up with recommendations,
Okay.
meet with all the persons, elected officials, senators, reps, bring lists to board. Board then opens up the community feedback over a period of time. Board takes vote.
Okay.
So the date that the board was originally set to receive the names of schools was the 17th of November, which is next Tuesday, 7 days from today. Is that the date that we want to have that to receive the list of names and have that discussion?
Administration can't meet that timeline if we're going to do the route that I just described.
Okay. So then, do you have a proposed date that you would be able to do?
I do not. What I would like to do is come back to the board with that date, but it will be, the question for me becomes, are we doing it before the calendar year ends, or are we doing it after the calendar year ends? That's the direction I need to have. And then I can determine that, what the date looks like.
And I do appreciate that you are going to do it this way because, you know, I think we're going to get a lot of emails no matter what, but I think taking our little bit more time to make sure that we've done all these steps, I think will help the community realize that we have certainly, the district has certainly considered their concerns ahead of time.
So I am a little concerned. We've talked about timeline before, and I know, going into the beginning of a new calendar year, we start really seeing a lot more contracts and MOUs generated. So I want us to be mindful of that. I also want to make sure, I think that we're not erasing the conversations that have been had in the past. So I know, we have a plethora of maps and data from the city. And there have been conversations that have been ongoing over a period of years. So I guess my question is, if we were to postpone this decision for further discussions, what would be different and what information would you expect to get out of it that would be helpful to help inform the decision?
The December 15th timeline date is the date I would still like to arrive at. What I would like to say is there may need to be a special meeting when I present these to you, and it may not be necessary to have a work session next week. And so that would be, again, I'll come back to the board with a recommendation, but I would need all next week to have the conversation with the elected officials such that they feel comfortable, I feel comfortable that we've done our due diligence around that. And then to present something to the board either the first week in December or the last week in November if the board is willing to meet during Thanksgiving break.
Well, so I appreciate that update. That helps clarify for me what your time frame is and kind of the, that process. My question, my other question was more specific around, you've been in conversations with the city throughout your tenure as superintendent. You've been in conversations with the SLDC and the LRA, and we have these maps, and I know that it's been going on before our time, but especially since last fall. So what would be different about these new conversations, and what new information would you be looking for?
I think part of what the board is asking is that we do at least validate the concerns that the elected officials might have. We have not had one-on-one conversations with them, and any of the times they've gotten snippets of information about what they heard, but we've not sat down with them and had a one-on-one conversation about what the recommendations might be and the reasons why, not with all of them. I want to be very careful that we have had that conversation with very specific alderpersons, so there will not be any surprises when I talk to them next week. But there are a few that we have not had that conversation with because we didn't really name all of the schools. The SAB looked at about 5 or 6 schools that we walked away from prior to the elected board coming back with the idea that they were asking the elected board to make the decisions.
Okay, so they will have names of schools.
They will have names of schools, that is correct. That is what the recommendation is tonight.
I think considering how can we make sure the confidentiality is protected? Because if the intent is to have these conversations.
No, I think you know once.
I'm afraid that this will that we won't be the ones communicating our plan.
That is highly possible when you meet with persons who are, that is going to happen. That's going to happen.
This is Natalie, and I share Dorothy's concern. That was kind of what I was trying to say before, is when we make the alder people the first points of contact and take that away from the public and the board, it feels like we're giving them even more power than the people that we should be representing. And again, with the confidentiality, especially, we lose the ability to control the narrative if we release those lists to other people.
I can obviously provide the board a copy, as was in the email last week. The board just needs to tell me what they want to do in that space.
I personally don't think I need a list if you go through the process of doing this due diligence. I think part of my decision is going to be based on what you get from these public officials if they have if they bring additional information to the table that maybe was not considered. So you guys can sort through that. And if someone says, oh, you have to close that school population of people who absolutely couldn't make it to another place, and that changes your decision, I would hope you guys sort through all of that before bringing it to us for ultimate approval or vote. So in terms of confidentiality, everything is proposed until it's final. It's all proposed. So even if they let it out, the fact of the matter is it's just proposed. Even if you brought it to this room early and then we voted on it, it's still just a proposed list. So, I'm not sure if, we're going to lose something if you brought it here early and we don't finalize the list, or you discuss it with the alder people and they don't, and the list is not finalized. I'm not sure if there's going to be much of a difference.
So I hear what my team is saying, but also I'm reading the documents that say that neither the St. Louis Development Corporation nor the City of St. Louis guarantee the accuracy or adequacy of the data that are contained here. So I'm sure that we got the best that we could probably receive on here, but we also just made a majority vote tonight to add 5 more points to the impact on the neighborhood. And so, Dr. Adams, my question to you is, do we have to disclose, if we're talking to schools in specific areas, do we have to specifically disclose them when you're having those conversations? Or could it be that SLPS is currently in an evaluation process of schools in specific areas that have high crime rates, low employment, X, Y, and Z. And so said alderperson or committee person, based off of this information, what are some of your ideas, or what are some resources that you would have to support any initiatives in your area outside of giving them the exact name? And I'm not trying to say to pull the shade over anybody's eyes or anything, but we can still keep our power in that.
Yeah, well, I can nuance the conversation. So the answer to the question is yes. Clearly, I can nuance the conversation in a way that comes across as informative, but not necessarily putting everything out on the table.
Yeah.
So I think what might make sense, and I would love to hear some board feedback on this, is if we, what I'm trying to do, in all honesty, is avoid 7 people all looking at their calendars right now to see when we want to meet again to hear this. So I guess what I would like is either someone to propose something to the timeline, or you allow me the opportunity to speak with Dr. Adams and kind of come up with a new timeline and then bring that back to the board.
So it would be my recommendation, Madam President, if we could look at the 17th, postponing the work session, moving that to the 1st, I think is December 1st, which is a Tuesday, and have the meeting where the announcement happens then. It still gives us some time to advertise and get feedback and do those kinds of things. That would be my recommendation. And if we need to push anything back, instead of having a meeting on December the 15th, we could move it to December the 17th, which is a Thursday, just for the sole purpose of voting. That would be my recommendation.
All right. Is there any opposition to that? So we will move forward with that, Dr. Adams, and I will put something in writing out to you and confirm all of those dates. But as it stands right now, we will postpone the announcement of names pending discussions with the city to December 1st. If you think of something after the meeting as it relates to timeline, please let me know. I know it's hard to think about dates in the middle of a meeting. So we have a presentation on Restart. Is that with Dr. Knight, is that correct?
No, I'm sorry. The Restart is just a verbal update.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to make the board aware that we pushed back middle and high school to the first week in January. We are still assessing what's happening in elementary schools, meeting with the health department tomorrow. As the number of cases rise, as the number of quarantine cases that we have to manage also, we are still managing those kinds of things. But at this point in time, we plan on completing elementary school through Thanksgiving, and then depending upon new guidelines from the CDC, because they put out some new guidelines regarding holiday travel on the 9th, which was yesterday. We're mindful of looking at those to make some decisions as we move forward. But basically, just to make the board aware that middle and high school won't be coming back until December the 4th. At this point in time, we're watching cases, we're talking to the health professionals and our colleagues in the county and city as we think about the decisions that we need to make. That's just a really verbal update regarding Restart.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I ask a real quick question? I know you have to get out of here. What does the district do to ensure that schools are following all the protocol? Because that concerns me. Like, are we making sure that kids are separated before they get on the bus? Are we keeping their distance before they get on buses? Are we making sure that principals are insisting that rooms be wiped down and that desks can be separated? because those are the kind of concerns that I'm hearing about, that that district may set protocol, but the school leaders have to ensure that that protocol is being followed. And what are we doing to ensure that the protocols that we set in place are being followed at the schools?
So the network superintendents and the facility team are the two entities that I depend upon as it relates to that. And so we are monitoring those things. To your point, there are cases where persons have become a little bit more lax than they should be. Once we find out about those things, then we obviously try to address them. We've had 3 professional development sessions with elementary principals, 1 with middle and high school, because kids are not in place, but we are finding that people are relaxing their the protocols, but we are on them and talking to them and encouraging them and monitoring what happens in a particular school with the signs and all of those things. But you are correct. In some cases, rare cases, I want to indicate there are some challenges as it relates to those things, but we do have the network superintendents and Mr. Casey and Mr. Watson's team also supporting. One of our challenges, quite frankly, is some of the protocols are dependent upon having people. And when people are quarantined, it impacts the flow and impacts what happens. And we're finding more quarantining happen, not as a result of what's happening in the school, but the result of what's happening in the community and adults coming in the building, and then we have to quarantine them. And I'll just use one example before I run out. I got an email 2 or 3 days ago. I was with my son's girlfriend who's now become positive for the virus. What should I do? We have to quarantine you. It didn't happen in school, but you have to be quarantined and you're a nurse. So that nurse is not there to support that particular school. We have to take somebody from middle or high school to do that. So what we're finding, quite frankly, Ms. Fowler, is that this quarantining piece is the biggest challenge that we're finding. Not that all of the cases are happening in schools, but the quarantining piece is the thing that's becoming more problematic for us than originally anticipated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next presentation is the monthly financial update with Ms. Banks.
Good evening. This will be a brief financial update. We have removed some of the slides that are repetitive from month to month. Of course, not our financial objectives. We'll always have those up for your view. And the agenda. This will be the financial update for October year to date. So regarding our COVID update, we have received the $284,000 for the Access Grant. Those funds have covered some of the internet monthly services that we provided for students. The $977,000 connection grant covers some of the costs for the high school laptops. The transportation department is still evaluating the costs that will be eligible under the transportation grant, and those costs will offset some of the GOB transportation costs. The October $1.4 million that we discussed last month, we actually received those, and they will also cover a portion of the high school laptop costs. As far as our original 10.7 million CARES update, we have now spent roughly $3 million or 28% of the budget, mainly on PPE, sanitation, and payroll costs. You'll note that in the bottom section, the biggest addition we've made to this pot of money includes the cost for the instructional support centers, those payroll costs. Of course, these funds are the largest pot of CARES funds that we have, and they also have the longest spend date. So we can spend these through September 2022. So we're really trying to leverage these funds to make sure that we use the funds that are due sooner, just like the $977,000. So we spent those down. Those have to be spent by the end of this fiscal year. So it's kind of a something that we're doing in finance to make sure that we're leveraging these funds. So these are the major highlights for October. As we just mentioned, the instructional support centers, they did close in October as we began to bring the elementary students back to in-classroom setting. Some of the largest expenditures, excluding payroll, include contracted services or purchase services. So what I've done is include contract payments over $100,000, which have totaled about $2.5 million for the month of October. And you can see that based on the items listed here, they are from multiple fund categories: GOB, food service, federal, and they also include a number of different departments. So the board office had some expenditures, technology, HR, and also student support services and special education. So these are revenues for the month of October for all funds. We received roughly $8.25 million, as you can see in red, or $22.2 million year to date, representing 5.6% of the revenue budget. You can see at the graph on the bottom that you can finally start to see some of the actuals. The blue graph bars are the budgets, and those are by source, and the red are the actuals. Still, through October, the greatest revenues that we've received include delinquent property taxes, sales taxes, and state aid. All of that is GOB, or our general operating budget. However, there have been some federal funds that we've received, including food service reimbursements and Perkins, which is one of our grants. Here are our expenditures for October, all funds. We spent $38 million in October, $88.6 million year to date, or 22% of the expenditure budget. You can see based on the categories, the expenditure categories, that salaries and benefits, of course, are always going to be the largest. And if you look on the far right, you can see the percent of the budget year to date, and you can see that salaries are about 25%. Everything that's in that 20-something percent is pretty typical as to where we should be right now. The contracted or purchased services always seem to be somewhat of a lagging indicator, if you will, because typically those are the contract payments that will come a month to 2 months later. Again, you can see at the graphic on the bottom, the blue bars are the budget and the green bars are the actuals. And you can see at the far right bar graph that green 22%. So that's really starting to tick up. So excluding COVID-19 and the multitude of issues that surround that, these are our two biggest financial outlooks where we have questions. Of course, our property taxes, which we are anticipating in December. In December and January is where we receive approximately 90% of our property taxes. So will we receive what we expect? That'll be a big indicator as to what's going to happen for the rest of the rest of the year as far as our budget is concerned. And then as Dr. Adams has just addressed, kind of the conversation that will ensue concerning the structural and academic situation that we're in. So that really concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I have a couple. One, the CARES dollars that we get, do we get that on a reimbursement basis, or do we get that all up front?
Well, these CARES funds, we actually received these. Okay. We have received all of those. So we have those funds right now, all $10.7 million.
Where is that in the revenue budget, in the revenues?
Federal. It's in the federal.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we received 10 million, but we show 1.7 million. What am I missing?
Well, we actually received those CARES dollars last fiscal year, I believe.
Oh, okay.
They're received in 20.
Okay, and then the other question is a question I asked last month, but I want to bring it up again. Is it possible that we could use CARES dollars to expand the Wi-Fi bandwidth in schools? And the reason I'm asking this is if we get to the point where, you know, we close down the ISCs, ICSs, those community programs, and we brought teachers back, if we have to, if there's a time where we have to close down schools because of COVID, is there a way that we could maybe keep some of the schools open if we expand the bandwidth, the Wi-Fi bandwidth, and allow teachers to teach virtually in the classroom with shields and the appropriate bandwidth, and still give parents the ability to work if they need to? Have we explored that at all, the expanding of Wi-Fi bandwidth in schools, so that we don't be an incredible burden on parents while not exposing our teachers to more risk?
Yes, CARES would certainly be an eligible pot of money for that. And we have had some internal conversations, and I think I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Vanoy.
Okay.
So we're currently looking at doing an RFP with the E-rate funds to where we could upgrade our current Wi-Fi appliances that we have in every classroom. Those pieces of appliances were put in 2012 and 13, and there's one in every classroom. So expanding really wouldn't be the option. It would be upgrading to a newer platform. And we could pay that through E-rate, and we would only pay 10% of the cost.
Okay, so is that something that the district is actually considering, or are you guys just looking at it to satisfy the question, or?
No, we're preparing the RFP right now. We have to wait for the E-rate funding window to open before we can apply, but we are working on that RFP as we speak.
Okay, thank you, very good.
You're welcome.
Do you have any more? I have a couple questions, Ms. Banks. I think they're mostly quick. The first one, I know you gave us the overall spending or percent that we're at for CARES dollars at 28%, and you said that there's $977,000 that needs to be spent by the end of this year. How far along are we with spending that $977,000?
We actually have spent that already. That is a separate pot, so it's not included in this 10.7.
So
this
is already spent.
The 977, yes.
Okay. Okay. And then I know usually around October, we get our first reimbursement from the state. And I know that's usually based on attendance, which is different this year. Are we still expecting some sort of state reimbursement?
Yes, we are receiving state funds, and it's always based on, well, we receive that monthly. And then depending on what the attendance is, the enrollment and attendance, that amount that we're receiving might change in the following month. But yes, we are receiving state aid. We have received it July, August, September, October, yes.
And just follow up to that, have there been any considerations that have been made because of the virtual nature of half of our district right now, or is that not a consideration? Are we just looking at enrollment?
Well, it is a consideration because based on the requirements that the state has for virtual and whether or not a student is successfully completing the virtual platform, their attendance is recorded at 94%. And when students are in person, it's the actual rate based on their enrollment, but there are also some other considerations, whether or not they're attending both virtually and in person, that I don't exactly know all those rules off the top, but yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Banks, you mentioned enrollment and attendance. Now, are we being paid based on attendance or enrollment, because you're using them interchangeably?
Well, it's actually based on attendance, so the number of hours per day. So there's a rate that is calculated, but it's actually attendance.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Banks? Thank you.
Thank you.
For the consent agenda, we have 4 walk-on items, which we will take separately. Are there any other items that the board would like to take separately? So I move that we accept the November consent agenda, which is items 11-10-2001 through 11-10-2012. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there questions or discussion on any of those items? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
I move that we accept consent agenda item 11-10-2013. Is there a second?
Second?
Questions or discussion on this item? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
I move that we accept consent agenda item 11-10-2014. Is there a second?
Second?
Questions or discussion?
Yeah, for this one, and I guess the one before it, is there a reason why these are walk-ons?
Dr. Knight, Adam has a question about why 13 and 14 are walk-on.
14 is the food and nutrition. I cannot answer that, Mr. Lane, but I can certainly get an answer for you.
No further questions.
Are there other questions on item 14? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you come back to her? Okay. Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Ms. Val, what is your vote on 11-10-20-14?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I move that we accept item 11-10-2015.
Second.
Questions or discussion on this item? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Move that we accept item 11-10-2016. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. I have asked each of the committee chairs to kind of give us an update. Dr. Roberts, I'm sorry, not Dr. Roberts. Ms. Fowler, would you like to present first or to go first?
I'm updating on the Vision Mission Committee. We met and we sent out a survey to all the board members and Dr. Adams to help us come up with the vision. I received all of the surveys as of today, so I will be sending those out to the committee members. We'll schedule another meeting to prepare a proposed statement for the board's review, hopefully at the December work session, and then ultimately after revision, come up with the final statement.
Are there any questions for Regina about the committee? Natalie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear
if
me?
you could be a little louder, it would be great.
Can you hear me now?
Better.
That's better, thank you.
Okay, so the governance committee met we met in September and October, and our next meeting is coming up November 16th. We determined in September that our first order of business was to review the board's code of ethics. So we are working on that. We got through every bullet point at our last meeting, and we are working on any potential revisions to bring to the full board for a vote. Again, this is just going to be a recommendation from the committee, and it will go to the full board before anything is finalized. So our next meeting is November 16th at 12 p.m. It is going to be virtually via Zoom. We will be discussing those revisions and hopefully coming up with a final presentation for the board.
Are there any questions for Natalie? Adam?
The ad hoc budget committee, we were supposed to meet on October 30th. Members showed up, but we did not have enough for a quorum, so that meeting did not take place. Seeing as the extension for the ad hoc committee is until the end of, or till this month, we'll be looking to meet this month and probably bring a recommendation back to the board for either an extension or otherwise, but I'll let the board know in advance of our December executive session.
So it would be an open session item.
Correct.
Yeah. Are there any questions for Adam? Okay. Board member reports. Joyce, would you like to start?
Yes, ma'am. I represented the board at the Council of Great City Schools Conference, October 13th through the 17th. It was exceptional. The theme was race and equality in COVID-19, and the purpose was to bring urban school districts together to compare notes, show support, discuss best practices, and share experiences. And there were a number of takeaways, and so I've created a document that I will email to everyone.
Adam?
None at this time.
Regina?
Nothing for me.
Donna?
None at this time.
So I just wanted to, I know I do this every month, but it's really important to me. I just wanted to make sure that all the teachers that are out there working so hard every day to give our students not only what they need for an education, but what they need to survive right now, that we're honoring that. It's a huge, huge, huge undertaking, which I respect so very much as a board member and a parent and just a general human being. I think it is awe-inspiring what you are doing, and thank you so very much for doing that. And not just the teachers, but all the support staff and school-based personnel that are working every day just to keep everyone safe and giving them what they need. And also to everyone at 801 who is working so very hard every day in very long hours to make sure our teachers have what they need to be there for our kids. So thank you so very much. And to all the parents that are out there, please just hang in there. This is very hard. And ICU. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Bowell,
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Meeting is adjourned.